As I mentioned earlier, our guest, Ilyas Tanuti, was also a teenager passionate about technology, particularly automotive, before he turned his head towards the stars. After a master's degree in Manchester, this engineer dedicated himself to what satellites can offer for environmental protection and agricultural production. I met him in Paris. Take a look. Hello, Ilyas. Thank you for joining us on our show. It's great to have you.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Ilyas, so you're from Tanger, Morocco, and you are a space system engineer. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
So how do we just one day decide to become a space system engineer, and what is it that you do?
Well, for me, it started through Formula One. I used to be kind of obsessed with Formula One, and most Formula One engineers who work on aerodynamics, which was the part that really interested me, were aerospace engineers. They have studied aerospace engineering. So that's where I decided to study aerospace engineering, which is a bit of a mixture between aviation and space. And at the beginning, my love for Formula One stepped to a love for aviation, and at some point it started stepping into love for space as well. And at the end of my degree, I did a one-year internship with this large company who manufactures satellites called Thales Alenia. And it was there on my second month, I think, where I just realized, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. I love it, and I want to dedicate my career to it. And what is a space systems engineer? So I would say that a space systems engineer is basically someone who works in putting together all the different elements that comprise a space mission. So both the different elements that make up a satellite. So how can the part of satellite that powers the satellite and the part that controls its temperature and make sure it's at the right level work together towards achieving the mission, for example.
Brilliant. You mentioned your experience at Thales Alenia. This is really when you realized that you wanted actually to work in the space industry. Tell us about it.
So my experience at Thales Alenia was really, really good from the very beginning. I had actually an amazing supervisor, Andy, who really kind of ignited this passion into me for space. And I was in what was called the Advanced Concepts team. So this is basically a team working on designing space missions on the very early phases, which is when you can be more creative, when you have more room for improvisation, let's say. And I love this. And I also love the fact that we were working in lots of very different types of missions. So from ones about how to handle samples of Martian soil once they return to Earth, to ones about climate change on Earth, to others about telecommunication satellites on the Moon, and this was really fantastic for me. And I think at this time is also when I decided to do a master's in space, which I did on interdisciplinary space studies at the International Space Universities, which gave me also this not only engineering perspective of the space industry and the space ecosystem, but also the policy one, the business one, which is what I love, connecting all of these different worlds.
Space seems very exciting. So my question is, why should we focus on the space industry while we have, many other problems here down on Earth?
Well, most people believe that space is about astronauts, it's about space exploration, and indeed it is about those things, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. In reality, most space companies, most of the work done is actually on tackling Earth problems. Probably the easiest example or the most impactful example is by saying that there is no number of climate variables that we need to control, to measure. More than half of them can only be measured effectively from space. So this is why space is not a nice to have, but it's really a must. And you can also think of other type of applications like GPS that we have had for decades now, and we use in our daily lives, meteo data, the weather, applications on agriculture, and many other things.
Interesting. So you're saying that the space industry provides innovative solutions to major challenges such as food security, environmental sustainability, access to clean energy, for example. Do you have some concrete examples that you can share with us?
Yes, I can speak about one concrete example from where I work, Constellar. So what we do at my company, we measure temperature from space. And this has variety, a large list of applications, but one very concrete in agriculture is that of detecting hydric stress. So if you think of plants, just like humans, they transpire to control their temperature. But at some point, when they feel like they don't have enough water, they will stop transpiring and their temperature will go up. By measuring that temperature of the crop fields from space, you can detect this, and very early in this process, take an action. So take an action in terms of your irrigation plan or some other solution. So this is a very powerful insight that you can get from space. And why space and not other types of ways of measuring temperature? Why not from drones or from the ground? It's because space satellites enable you this global coverage. It also enables doing so in a consistent manner where the data is homogeneous, so comparable on the different takes. So these are two points, but there are many others for which you would want to do it from space.
You mentioned Constellar, so about measuring temperature. Probably just a few words about what you're doing there exactly.
Well, my current role is as a VP for delivery and customer success. So, well, customer success I think speaks for itself. Delivery is about ensuring that in operations, from the moment that a customer requests data of, for example, let's give me data on the city of Paris so I can detect urban heat islands in the city of Paris. So from that moment till we actually deliver the data, there is a number of events that need to happen in terms of planning what the satellite has to do, processing that data on ground. So it's about coordination and controlling that process.
So how Africa, you come from Morocco, right? Maybe, I don't know if it makes sense to speak about that. How Africa and particularly Morocco can harness the space industry for socio-economic development, because this is what it's about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there are many different ways. I mean, we have mentioned some applications before. I would think maybe in terms of direct effects on socioeconomic benefits of using satellite technologies, especially satellite data, I would highlight two. One of them is bridging the digital gap between rural areas and urban areas. So through satellites, telecommunication satellites, we can get internet and connectivity to remote areas where with ground infrastructure is nearly impossible to access. And this is one of the main challenges in terms of inequality that the country faces. And another one would be on agriculture that we have mentioned, but also on fighting drought, another big problem for the country. And then on the indirect effects or benefits of developing a space industry, I would say that one, creation of jobs and creation of a highly skilled workforce, which would again not tackle one of the main problems in the country, which is brain drain and unemployment among the youth. But then you also would have no other economic benefits. It's kind of a domino effect when you start developing high cutting edge technology in your country.
Elias, last year, in 2023, the African Union Commission, in partnership with the Egyptian government, officially inaugurated the Africa Space Agency. So why do we need an Africa Space Agency?
So I think this is a very interesting question, because already at the time there were different voices regarding positioning themselves in different ways on the need or not need of creating an African Space Agency. The main concerns were about the governance of balancing the needs of all the countries in the African Union, because at the end the African Space Agency is part of the African Union. It's not a separate entity. Now, in my opinion, I do believe that it was the correct direction to take. There is a number of reasons. Probably the two easiest ones for people to understand the stronger points would be one, coordination of efforts, given the limited financial capacity of many of these countries. Pooling resources, financial resources, but infrastructure resources, expertise resources in all the sense, in one common effort is something very positive that would make the efforts of each one of those individual countries much easier later on. And then the other reason is simply that we do share a lot of the problems, a lot of the same problems. Of course, it's a very big continent with many, many countries, but there is still a lot of common ground in which we can work together, and generally, collaboration, cooperation is always the best way.
There are already some leading nations in the space race. What about international cooperation? Is the African Space Agency collaborating with them on specific topics?
So I'm not sure till what point the African Space Agency is already doing this, because it has just been created very recently. However, the people who are now leading this agency within the African Union, they had already started many different programs, collaboration programs. For example, with the European Union, one very big program is called GMES and Africa, which is it's co-financed by the African Union and the European Union Commission, and it's about providing access to Earth observation data and developing indigenous capacity in Africa in terms of people being able to handle this data and use it, for different applications. So it's a very interesting one. Then different countries have had different collaborations with China, with Russia, with France, with the US. Japan has some very interesting technology transfer programs that are academia-based. BIRDS program is one of them, where countries who have not yet launched a satellite can send some students who are formed and who design and develop like a small satellite, which is later launched. So there is lots of different things going on, and hopefully more to come.
You mentioned satellites. The first African satellite was launched like 20 years ago. What has happened since? What could be the benefits for Africa to send their own satellites?
Very good question again. And so South Africa, yes, they launched the first African satellite in the 98. Since then, I believe we're on a count of 60 satellites, more or less, from 17 countries. Now, it's true that pretty much half of them come from 3 or 4 leading countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Algeria, Egypt. These are the leading ones, but we have more and more countries who are jumping into this train, trying to develop their own satellites. It's also nice to see that some of these are actually being developed in African soil and not just purchased from other countries. We have also a large number of countries developing national space programs. And this also entails creating space policies, concrete strategies, roadmaps to follow that are part of the larger socio-economic plans that the country has. So we have discussed about the benefits of space data. Now, of course, all of these countries, all African countries, could simply get the data from Europe, from the US, from wherever. Why having their own satellites which produce this data, or telecommunication satellites to provide the connectivity? One reason is data sovereignty. So a lot of the users of this data are critical to the country, so you really do not want to depend on anyone else other than yourself, or in this case the African Union, the cooperation framed. Another reason is that space data has very particular use cases. So you want to be able to customize your satellites to really addressing the type of problems that you have. So therefore, in this sense, it's also smarter to have your own satellites. Another one is simply more cost-effective method. In the long term, purchasing data will end up being more expensive than developing your own satellites. And then again, all those indirect benefits of simply developing this technology in-house, that will spur into other industries in your country, in your region.
So, Ilyas, maybe one final question. What about your future projects, or simply your message to the African youth watching our show today about, for example, working in the space industry?
So from my side, I've always loved being involved in space outreach, so trying to communicate this larger idea of space and its benefits to Earth. So I'll continue doing this, for example, with Je m'engage pour l'Afrique, which is a public policy think tank with which we have published recently a book that discusses all of these matters that we have talked about today. And then my advice for the youth, I would say 2 different things. One of them is be curious and learn as much as you can, not only about space, but also about all of those different industries that are going to benefit from space, so you can actually understand its use and how to actually make it useful for the end users, for our everyday lives. And the second thing would be for me to motivate all youth to not be scared about the financial challenge that comes with wanting to get into the space industry. It has changed a lot in the past few years, and it's different now.
Thank you, Ilyas. It was great to have you.
Thank you.